The ATF has a nasty habit of punishing law-abiding gun owners while failing to stop genuine criminal enterprises. Tales of gun shops dealing with endless red tape, or worse, being shut down over tiny oversights, are everywhere. The ATF claims these measures keep illegal firearms off the streets, but in reality, they're more about flexing enforcement powers than going after true criminals. In this video, we'll talk about the agency's latest attempts to clamp down on the resale of police firearms, all because of a claim that these guns might wind up in the wrong hands. Considering this corrupt agency's track record, it's hard not to question their motives. Is this really about genuine public safety, or is it just an under-the-radar attack against 2A advocates? Conversations about the ATF often drift toward tales of big botched operations, but the ATF's fresh crop of policies raises eyebrows for a different reason. Instead of major raids or undercover investigations gone bad, the agency seems set on regulating gun owners into oblivion, one new rule at a time. The zero-tolerance approach is a prime example. If a gun shop slips up on something as small as a paperwork error, the feds can yank its license. That leaves small business owners, often people who take compliance seriously, on the brink of losing their livelihoods over technicalities that do nothing to stop hardcore criminals. Some see these moves as a shift away from catching bad guys and more toward piling regulations onto anyone who even thinks about buying or selling firearms. Through executive actions, the definition of who is engaged in the business has expanded so far that a person who sells a handful of guns could find themselves forced to get a federal license. It doesn't take a genius to see how that might discourage casual sellers or collectors who just want to trade legally and responsibly. These policies are hurdles intended to wear us down. If authorities can't outright ban guns, they'll bury every transaction in so much red tape that we'll have no choice but to give up. It's especially frustrating because many of us, dealers, private citizens, etc., are scrupulously following the law. Meanwhile, real criminals don't bother with forms or waiting periods. They get guns through theft, straw purchasers, or the black market. This uptick in regulations also has local police departments in the crosshairs. For years, law enforcement agencies have sold their used sidearms or rifles to help upgrade their gear. The revenue from those sales might go toward newer duty weapons, protective gear, or training. Now, the ATF suggests that reselling these guns is risky because criminals might get hold of them. Most cops will tell you that's not how it works. These sales happen through licensed channels, and buyers go through background checks. It's already structured to keep guns out of bad hands. Instead of tackling actual crime, the ATF seems content to make everything harder for the folks following the rules. Local police departments have budgets that are often stretched thin. One way they've managed to stay updated with gear is by trading in older firearms to licensed dealers. The money or trade credits help them invest in modern weapons, better body armor, or upgraded technology, things that officers need to do their jobs safely and effectively. Now the ATF is warning departments to think twice about that practice, claiming these resold guns might eventually wind up used in a crime. Cops and gun enthusiasts alike are scratching their heads. Those used Glocks, SIs, or Smith & Wesson M&Ps get sold legally, complete with background checks and the usual paperwork. If one of these guns is down the line stolen or misused, that doesn't prove the original police sale was the issue. A firearms journey can take any number of twists, especially when thieves or underground traffickers are involved. Targeting police trades doesn't do much to address the real factors driving crime. This concern might seem small, but it sets a worrisome precedent. First, the ATF points a finger at how police departments handle their own inventory. Next, who's to say they won't come after private transfers or gun show sales under the same rationale? Many folks see it as a way to blur the lines between legitimate commerce and illicit activity, which then justifies more invasive rules. For everyday gun owners, these advisories add yet another layer of distrust. It's tough to watch a federal agency repeatedly discourage lawful transactions while major leaks in illegal pipelines go unchecked. People who follow the law worry they'll end up bearing the brunt of new regulations that do little to curb violence. Instead, it's mostly law enforcement and responsible citizens feeling the pinch, all while criminals still find ways to get their hands on guns. In a country where the Second Amendment has always been a crucial part of our identity, these shifts create tensions between federal agencies and local communities. Nobody wants guns in the hands of criminals, But the road the ATF is choosing is more about restricting everyone than focusing on those truly breaking the law. These geniuses has been waving around a figure. More than 52,000 police-owned guns supposedly linked to crimes in the past 2 decades. Let me repeat that. Supposedly. At first glance, that number sounds huge, and it's enough to scare folks into thinking police trade-ins are fueling a wave of violence. But when you break it down, that's around 2,600 per year across a country with hundreds of thousands of gun-related offenses annually. It's a tiny slice of the pie, which calls into question why the ATF is making such a fuss. The data itself might not even be purely about legally traded-in firearms. Sometimes guns are stolen from police stations or diverted in other ways. Those get lumped in with the totals. So the 52,000 figure includes weapons that slipped through cracks unrelated to legal sales. But that detail doesn't grab headlines as effectively, so the narrative that police trade-ins are fueling crime keeps getting repeated. It creates a convenient excuse for the ATF to push for more control, even though the numbers don't truly back up the claim. Criminals typically get their guns from theft, illegal street deals, or straw purchases. A Bureau of Justice Statistics report showed that a significant chunk of guns used in crimes came from underground sources or were simply stolen. It's no secret that the black market doesn't run background checks or keep track of serial numbers. Meanwhile, guns leaving police inventories go straight into the legal market. They aren't handed out in shady back alleys. The process requires going through licensed dealers who follow federal guidelines. To anyone looking at this objectively, the ATF's messaging is more of a scare tactic than a legitimate public safety measure. If the goal is to curb violent crime, focusing on legal resale programs isn't going to make a real dent. The far bigger issue is how to stop illegal trafficking and theft, which are the real pipelines for criminals. By homing in on police resales, the agency misdirects attention from the actual sources of guns used in crimes. The frustrating part for many gun owners is that these statistics get repeated without clarification. When the public hears 52,000 police guns found at crime scenes, they assume the guns were sold directly to criminals, which is far from the truth. Facts get muddled, and the ATF benefits from that confusion by pushing new advisories and restrictions. For years, this anti-2A agency has faced accusations that it hammers legitimate transactions while letting real gun smugglers off the hook. Operation Fast and Furious is the prime example people bring up. In theory, the plan was to keep an eye on suspects buying firearms in bulk and see where those guns ended up. In reality, the ATF lost track of the weapons, some turned up at violent crime scenes, and a U.S. Border Patrol agent was killed with one. That was a national embarrassment, and it still looms over the agency's reputation. Meanwhile, the ATF has reported tens of thousands of guns that disappeared from licensed dealers between 2016 and 2023. More than 72,000, which is an even bigger number than the guns reported stolen in that same time frame, according to ATF.gov. And then there's the so-called ghost gun panic, a convenient excuse the ATF uses to justify more power grabs. These are privately made firearms, completely legal under the Second Amendment, yet the ATF keeps waving around some manufactured 1,600% increase a stat to scare the uninformed. Meanwhile, thousands of actual crime guns are slipping through the cracks because the ATF is too busy going after hobbyists and home builders instead of real traffickers. But rather than addressing cartel gun smuggling, illegal straw purchases, or the sheer incompetence that has led to tens of thousands of firearms disappearing from federal oversight, the ATF's latest obsession is stopping police departments from legally reselling their used firearms. They'd rather harass cops trying to fund their equipment upgrades than lift a finger against actual criminals. Anyone paying attention sees what's going on. Instead of cracking down on the black market, the ATF chooses easy targets, law-abiding gun dealers, local police, and private citizens, because they know those groups will follow the rules, making them easy to bully. It's all about making a big show, pretending they're doing something about crime, when in reality, they're just making life harder for people who respect the law. Every new restriction, every so-called advisory, is just another step towards squeezing out legal gun owners while ignoring the real problems. At this point, defunding or outright abolishing the ATF isn't just some radical idea, It's looking more and more like the only way to stop this agency from becoming a full-blown weapon against the Second Amendment. When the ATF tells police departments to stop selling their used firearms, it's not just about those specific guns. This is how gun control always creeps in, one step at a time. First, they make a big fuss over police resales. And if they get their way, private gun sales are next on the chopping block. They don't want to stop at regulating dealers. They want every transaction, no matter how small, to be buried under government paperwork. The ATF already has the narrative in place. If they convince the public that police trade-ins are fueling crime, despite all sales going through legal channels, then it's just a short leap to arguing that all secondhand sales need tighter restrictions. That means more red tape, more hoops to jump through, and eventually an outright ban on private firearm transfers. Some states have already gone down this road, turning even the most basic exchanges between friends and family into bureaucratic nightmares under universal background check laws. The federal government has been inching toward this for years, with the so-called Bipartisan Safer Communities Act of 2022 being just one example, giving them more control under the guise of safety while doing nothing to stop actual criminals. Now, police departments have a choice to make. They can hold their ground, continue selling their used firearms to law-abiding citizens through licensed dealers, and show the feds they're not buying into the fear-mongering. Or they can cave to the pressure, cut off a legitimate source of funding for their officers, and let the ATF dictate how they run their departments. The right choice is obvious. If they stick to what they've done for decades, following legal resale practices, background checks, and all, they send a clear message. There's nothing wrong with law-abiding citizens owning these guns, and they're not going to be bullied into acting like there is. Gun owners need to push back too. Groups like the GOA and the SAF have been fighting ATF overreach for years, taking them to court and winning. They rely on our support. Getting involved, donating, or simply spreading awareness about these lawsuits can make a real difference. It's also time to start talking with local law enforcement. If police chiefs hear from their communities that people support legal firearm resales, they'll be less likely to roll over when the ATF starts pushing its agenda. And let's be blunt, this is political. Pay attention to who actually defends the Second Amendment and who bends the knee to gun control lobbyists. When elections roll around, vote for the people who will protect your rights, not the ones who want to erode them one regulation at a time. The fact that some lawmakers are openly calling for the ATF to be abolished tells you how bad it's gotten. Whether or not that happens anytime soon, the momentum is growing, and it's clear that people are fed up with an agency that functions more like a political weapon than a law enforcement body. And that's all the time we have for today. The ATF isn't after criminals. They're after legal gun owners. Today, it's shutting down legal police gun resales. Tomorrow, it's banning private sales. If we don't push back, they'll keep chipping away until lawful gun ownership is gone. Stay informed, call out their lies, and support groups fighting this overreach. Please share this video with your friends so they're aware, because if enough of us stand up, our government can't ignore us. Like, subscribe to keep up with the fight, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss updates. Because this battle for our rights is far from over. Thanks for watching.